The city slept beneath a sky that glowed soft and golden, unaware it was standing on the edge of disaster. It was late January 1968, the eve of Tet, Vietnam's Lunar New Year, and Hugh was quiet, almost dreamlike. The Perfume River cut through the heart of the city, calm and glassy, mirroring the ancient citadel's stone walls. Monks moved through temple courtyards with lanterns, vendors packed up their stalls, even the soldiers relaxed. The war, for a moment, seemed far away. But under that peace, something else was moving. Beyond the city's walls, down jungle trails and narrow roads, entire regiments of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers crept toward Hugh. They wore black pyjamas instead of uniforms and carried weapons wrapped in rags to muffle the metal. They were invisible in the mist, marching in silence. To the people of Hugh, they were ghosts still miles away. In truth, they were already at the gates. The US and South Vietnamese forces stationed nearby had been told this was a ceasefire period. The Tet holiday always came with an unofficial truce. Most Marines in the region believed the enemy wouldn't dare attack now. Many officers were even preparing barbecues and parties. The few intelligence warnings that something was coming were buried under paperwork. It was complacency, the kind that only exists right before everything breaks. Hugh was a city of culture, not combat. Its French villas and pagodas, its ancient citadel and university, gave it a sense of untouchable beauty. No one believed war could find its way into those narrow streets. But the city's design, the very thing that made it beautiful, also made it a trap. The walled fortress of the citadel sat across the Perfume River like a sleeping giant, one that could be turned into a fortress overnight. The enemy knew that. While fireworks prepared to light the night sky, NVA commanders finalised their maps. Their goal wasn't just to attack Hue, it was to hold it, to make it a symbol. Capturing this city, Vietnam's old imperial capital, would shock the world and prove that the war was far from over. As the sun set, the last ferries crossed the river. The city's lights flickered out one by one. The streets grew empty. The monks' chanting echoed softly over the water. And beyond the dark horizon, the first wave of soldiers crouched in the tall grass, waiting for their signal. In a few hours, the quiet streets of Hue would erupt into fire. The temples, the schools, the homes, all of it would become a battlefield. The illusion of peace was almost over. The first explosions came before dawn. They shattered windows, shook rooftops, and rolled through the streets like thunder. It was the morning of January 31st, 1968, the first day of Tet, and the city of Hue woke to chaos. In seconds, peace was gone. Rockets screamed across the Perfume River. Tracer fire cut through the fog. The North Vietnamese army and Viet Cong had struck without warning, and Hue was their prize. Within minutes, hundreds of enemy troops flooded into the city from every direction. They came across bridges, through alleys, and even through sewers. Civilians ran from their homes, confused and terrified. The smell of incense from Tet offerings still hung in the air, mixing with the acrid smoke of gunfire. The calm celebration of a new year had become a nightmare. The attack was precise, almost surgical. The enemy hit the police headquarters, the provincial prison, and key road junctions all at once. South Vietnamese defenders were caught off guard, their radio lines jammed, their officers struggling to regroup. The communist flag rose above the citadel before most American units even knew the city had fallen. Inside the USMACV compound on the south bank, a few dozen Marines and advisors braced for impact. They were surrounded, isolated, and badly outnumbered. Through the grey morning haze, they could see enemy troops moving through the streets, disciplined, coordinated, unstoppable. The Marines returned fire from sandbag positions and shattered windows, but for every enemy they dropped, two more appeared. Across the Perfume River, the citadel burned. Mortar shells landed among temples that had stood for centuries. Ancient pagodas collapsed in clouds of dust. The city that once symbolised Vietnam's soul was now a war zone, street by street, block by block. Reports poured in too late. Commanders outside Hue couldn't believe the scale of the assault. This wasn't a raid, it was an invasion. The North Vietnamese had smuggled entire divisions into the city without being detected. They knew exactly where to strike, the result of months of planning, infiltration and deception. By noon, the sound of small arms fire was constant, echoing like an unending drumbeat. The sky was choked with smoke. The streets were littered with burned-out vehicles and bodies. families huddled in basements, praying for it to stop. And through it all, the US Marines at Phu Bai, just a few miles to the south, waited for orders. They could hear the distant rumble of battle, the rising thunder of artillery, but no one yet understood what was happening inside Hue. What they were about to walk into wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a trap, one that would turn an ancient city into a graveyard. The Tet Offensive had arrived, and Hue was its beating heart. The morning fog was thick enough to hide a war. Highway 1 stretched north from Phu Bai toward Hue like a pale ribbon through rice paddies and scattered villages. Convoys of US Marines rolled slowly through it, trucks loaded with ammunition, medical supplies, and men who thought they were heading into a routine counterattack. They had been told Hue was under pressure, not that it had already fallen. The sound of the engines filled the air, low and steady. The men sat tense in the back of the trucks, rifles between their knees, watching the tree line on both sides. The fog muffled everything. No birds, no wind, just the rhythmic growl of diesel and the metallic rattle of gear. Then, from the mist ahead, came the first shot, a single crack, followed by a storm. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Bullets tore through the convoy, punching holes in canvas and metal. The Marines hit the dirt, scrambling for cover behind their vehicles. Rocket-propelled grenades screamed across the road, turning the first truck into a ball of fire. The ambush had been waiting for them, planned, positioned, and perfectly timed. The Marines fired back blindly at the smoke. The air filled with the snap of bullets, the thump of mortars, and the cries for medics. Every direction looked the same: fog, fire, and chaos. The rice paddies that flanked the road became death traps. Men who tried to run sank knee-deep in mud, exposed to gunfire from invisible snipers. By the time the lead units fought their way free, the road was littered with burning trucks and bodies. The ambush had turned the approach to Hue into a slaughter. The survivors pushed on, shaken but furious. The mission had changed. They weren't just reinforcing a city anymore, they were retaking it. When they finally reached Hue's southern outskirts, the sight was worse than anything they had imagined. Smoke poured from the rooftops. The sound of machine guns echoed through the streets. The city was alive with battle. Civilians stumbled through the rubble, carrying children, dragging the wounded. The Marines moved in formation, eyes scanning every window, every doorway. They didn't know it yet, but every street ahead would be an ambush, every house a bunker. The city was waiting for them. By the end of the day, the fog had lifted, revealing the full scale of what lay ahead. A maze of narrow streets, shattered buildings, and a determined enemy that refused to retreat. The Marines had reached Hue, but they hadn't entered it yet. They were standing at the gates of hell, and the fight was only beginning. The first step into Hue was like stepping into another world, one built from smoke, shattered glass, and fear. The Marines crossed the Ankou Bridge under constant fire, their boots slipping on blood and debris. The south side of the city lay in ruins. Buildings that had once held families and shops were now fortresses. Windows had become firing slits. Every street corner hit a rifle barrel. They advanced block by block, using tanks and armoured vehicles for cover, but the enemy was everywhere. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong had dug into the very bones of the city. Basements, attics, courtyards, even behind the walls of family homes. The Marines had fought in jungles before, where danger came from trees and shadows. Here, it came from the walls themselves. The air was thick with gunpowder and dust. The smell of burned wood mixed with the sickly sweetness of rotting food. Every doorway had to be cleared, every room searched. Marines kicked down doors and tossed grenades before stepping inside, their ears ringing from the blasts. Ceilings collapsed, plaster rained down. One street at a time, the city disintegrated. Artillery and air support were called in dangerously close, sometimes within metres of friendly lines. Buildings crumbled under the blasts, sending shockwaves through the ground. Entire blocks vanished into piles of concrete and rebar. Civilians trapped inside screamed for help as the city that had once been their home turned into a grave. Progress was measured in feet, not miles. A single intersection could take hours to secure. A sniper's bullet could end a man before he even saw the flash. At night, tracer fire lit the sky in streaks of red and white. The Marines huddled in doorways and behind rubble, listening to the enemy move just beyond the next wall. The radio calls never stopped. Coordinates, medevac requests, ammunition shortages. The city devoured everything they brought into it. By the third day, the south side of Hue was no longer a place. It was a sound. Gunfire, explosions, screams, the endless grinding of war. Every wall they breached revealed another fight. Every street they crossed demanded another sacrifice. Yet the Marines kept moving, crawling through holes blown in walls, dragging the wounded through smoke, trading rest for survival. When the sun finally broke through the haze, it didn't bring warmth, only light to reveal what was left. The south bank was scarred, burned, and unrecognisable, but it was theirs. Across the Perfume River, the citadel still stood, ancient, silent, and full of enemy guns. The hardest part was still ahead. Across the Perfume River, the citadel loomed through smoke like a ghost from another time. Its stone walls had stood for centuries, built by emperors, guarded by soldiers in silk armour. Now they were riddled with machine gun nests and hidden mortars. The ancient fortress had become a modern stronghold, its beauty buried beneath sandbags and shell craters. The flag of North Vietnam fluttered above it, red against a grey sky. The Marines and ARVN forces stood on the southern bank, staring across the river at what looked like another world. Every bridge that connected the two sides had been blown apart. Snipers controlled the crossings. The enemy had fortified the citadel's moats, dug trenches through courtyards, and turned temples into bunkers. To take it meant fighting through history itself. The assault began before sunrise. Smoke shells covered the river, and amphibious tractors churned through the water, carrying Marines toward the northern wall. The enemy opened fire immediately. Mortars fell into the water like heavy rain. Machine guns chewed through the fog. Men dove overboard to escape burning vehicles, swimming through mud and shrapnel. Those who made it across found themselves in a maze. The citadel was vast, a city within a city, with gardens, shrines, and narrow alleys that twisted in every direction. The NVA knew every inch of it. Every courtyard was a trap. Every archway led into another ambush. The Marines fought for each section like miners clawing through stone, their world reduced to smoke, fire, and the crack of rifles echoing off ancient walls. The ground was slick with rain and blood. The smell of incense still clung to some of the temples, mixing with the metallic scent of spent shells. Statues of emperors lay shattered beside broken rifles. The beauty of Hugh's past collided with the brutality of its present. Airstrikes were called in, but commanders hesitated. Every bomb dropped destroyed centuries of history. The Marines used mortars and recoilless rifles instead, inching forward through the rubble. Days blurred into nights. The citadel's walls, once symbols of endurance, became tombstones for both sides. By the third week, the US and South Vietnamese forces had carved their way deep into the fortress. The flag above the citadel was tattered now, hanging limp in the rain. Inside, the last pockets of defenders refused to surrender. They fought from cellars and tunnels, forcing the attackers to root them out one by one. When the final shot was fired, the citadel was nothing but ruins, stone walls blackened by fire, courtyards filled with craters. The cost had been staggering. The Marines had taken the fortress, but in doing so, they had destroyed it. The city had gone quiet, but quiet in Hue never meant safety. It meant someone was waiting. By mid-February 1968, the Marines had been fighting in Hue for weeks. The air stank of smoke, sewage, and decay. Rain turned the streets into rivers of mud and blood. The noise of constant battle had become background music, until it stopped. Then came the whispers, the footsteps, the sniper's single shot that broke the silence like glass. Snipers were everywhere. They used the city's ruins as hunting blinds, firing from collapsed roofs, bell towers, and broken windows. Some were so well hidden that entire platoons passed beneath them without realising it. One bullet could pin down a squad for hours. The Marines learned to move like ghosts, crouched, slow, watching every shadow, every window that looked too dark. Traps waited behind doors that looked safe. Tripwires stretched across staircases. Grenades hung from rafters by bits of wire. The Viet Cong and NVA had turned homes into minefields. Even children's toys were booby-trapped. Every time a Marine kicked open a door, he was gambling his life on a half-second of instinct. And between it all, the civilians were trapped. Families huddled in basements, monks sheltering the wounded in temple halls, old women waving white cloths as bullets cracked overhead. Many had nowhere to run. The line between combatant and bystander blurred until it no longer existed. A building could hold a family on the first floor and an enemy sniper on the second. The Marines often had to choose between saving lives and surviving. The city itself seemed to turn against them. The once beautiful architecture of Hue, the ornate facades, the narrow alleys, the courtyards and gardens became obstacles that hid death at every turn. You could not see the enemy, but you could feel him watching. Every corner carried the weight of an unseen threat. The stress was relentless. Men began to lose track of time. Sleep came in short bursts between firefights. Meals were eaten crouched behind rubble, listening for the next shot. The city had stripped them down to raw instinct. No grand tactics, no sweeping manoeuvres, just survival measured in walls cleared and breaths taken. When the rain came again, it washed the blood into the gutters and carried the smell of rot through the air. The Marines kept moving, their eyes hollow, their bodies running on fumes. They were ghosts in a dead city, fighting enemies they could not see and saving civilians who had already lost everything. Hue had become a graveyard of movement and memory, a place where every silence could kill you and every survivor had already seen too much. When the guns finally fell silent, Hue no longer looked like a city. It looked like the aftermath of an earthquake. The streets that once shimmered with lanterns were now buried in rubble. The Perfume River ran brown with mud and ash. The temples that had stood for centuries were cracked open like skulls. Smoke drifted low across the ruins, clinging to everything. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was heavier than the noise of war. The Marines moved through the wreckage in slow disbelief. Buildings they had fought to take no longer stood. Walls that had been cover days before were now just heaps of shattered brick. The air was filled with the buzzing of flies. Bodies, enemy, civilian, and friend, lay where they had fallen, half buried under stone and dust. No one dared count. And then came the discovery that changed everything. Outside the city, in rice paddies and shallow graves, civilians were found bound, blindfolded, and executed. The North Vietnamese had carried out mass killings during their occupation. Teachers, priests, city officials, and anyone suspected of helping the South or the Americans. Thousands had vanished in the chaos. Now the truth surfaced from the mud. The stench was unbearable. Marines and South Vietnamese soldiers dug up the graves with shovels and bare hands, uncovering the faces of men, women, and children. It wasn't just a battle now, it was a crime scene. The propaganda victory the North Vietnamese had hoped for had become a nightmare of their own making. Inside the city, the survivors wandered like shadows. Families searched the ruins for loved ones. Monks carried bodies to the pagodas, whispering prayers for the dead. The sound of weeping carried through the streets. For many, the victory at Hue meant nothing. The city was gone. Their homes were gone. The cost had been too high to call it anything but tragedy. American officers took photographs, wrote reports, and radioed back to Saigon. None of it captured the weight of what had happened here. Hue wasn't just a battlefield, it was a wound that refused to close. At night, flares still drifted over the ruins, lighting the shattered skyline for a few seconds at a time. The Marines who remained slept beside their rifles, unable to rest. Some said they could still hear the battle in their dreams, the gunfire, the screams, the endless echo of war inside stone walls. When the evacuation began, few looked back. Those who did saw a city of ghosts, empty streets, blackened windows, and the faint flutter of a torn flag over the citadel. Hue had been retaken, but no one who fought there ever truly left it behind. By the time the last Marines pulled out, Hue was unrecognisable. What had once been Vietnam's most beautiful city was now a skeleton of stone and ash. The Perfume River still flowed, but it carried pieces of broken bridges and shattered lives. Columns of smoke rose from both banks, twisting upward like ghosts returning to the sky. The sound of gunfire had faded, but the memory of it would echo for years. For the men who fought there, Hue was more than another battle. It was the moment when the war revealed its true face. There were no front lines, no safe zones, no victories that felt like triumphs. The enemy had turned every house, every wall, every alley into a weapon. The Marines had fought not just the North Vietnamese, but the city itself, and in the process, they had learned what modern urban warfare really meant. News of Hue reached America slowly, but when it did, it struck like a shockwave. The images were impossible to ignore. Marines crouched in rubble, monks leading survivors through ruins, American flags flying over destruction that looked like the end of the world. The reports from journalists painted a picture far different from the optimism the public had been told to believe. Hugh was not a victory, it was a revelation. The Tet Offensive, once seen as a desperate gamble by the North, had done what no bomb or battle could. It broke the illusion that the war was being won. Even though the US and South Vietnamese forces had retaken Hue, the psychological cost was immeasurable. The American public saw the truth. This war was far from over, and the enemy was far stronger than they had been told. For the Marines, the scars were personal. The city had taken friends, brothers, and years of peace. Many returned home carrying the ghosts of Hue with them, the faces of civilians caught in the crossfire, the echo of explosions in narrow streets, the smell of smoke that never seemed to wash away. In Vietnam, Hue became a wound that time could not heal. The citadel was rebuilt, its walls repaired, its gardens replanted, but beneath the surface, the past still lingered. The city stood again, proud and quiet, but forever marked by what had happened there. The Battle of Hue was more than a clash of armies. It was a warning, a reminder of how quickly civilization can crumble, how easily beauty can become ruin, and how war, once unleashed, consumes everything it touches. In the end, Hue did not die. It endured. But for those who walked its streets in 1968, the memory of that endurance came with a price that would never fade. The battle was over. The lesson was not. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below. I always read what you think. Hit like if you learned something new, and subscribe so you don't miss the next untold story of war, courage and survival. Turn on the bell for more history brought to life. See you in the next one.